Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. You guys want to know more about teamwork, so we cracked open Patrick Lencioni's Overcoming the Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And this book is like a field guide, packed with stuff you can actually use right away. And what really struck us is, everyone talks about teamwork, but Lencioni argues that it might be the single biggest untapped advantage out there.
And he makes a strong case for it. It's interesting how he presents these dysfunctions not as like separate issues, but as this interconnected model, like a pyramid.
Oh, okay. So imagine a pyramid. Each level is a dysfunction, and they all build on each other. What's at the foundation? Trust. And Lencioni doesn't mince words. He says, without trust, everything else crumbles.
Yeah, and he's talking about a specific kind of trust, too, vulnerability-based trust. It's not just about, being friendly or having team lunches. It's about having the courage to be open about your weaknesses, mistakes. That kind of exposure, that takes guts.
He tells this great story about a CEO who gets some pretty tough feedback during a 360 review, and he just flat out refuses to acknowledge it.
Oh, yeah. Classic example of an invulnerable leader. It's fascinating how much damage that can do to a team. If the leader isn't willing to be vulnerable, why should anyone else, right?
Exactly. So then how do we actually build this vulnerability-based trust? The book talks about some exercises, right?
Absolutely. Two that I found really helpful are the personal histories exercise and behavioral profiling.
The personal histories one sounds kind of fun. Sharing details about your childhood and stuff. I remember reading this anecdote where one guy learned something significant about a colleague during this exercise after working together for 9 years.
Yeah, it's amazing how little we really know about each other sometimes.
Totally. It really shows how easy it is to make assumptions about people without truly knowing them.
It's that fundamental attribution error in action. We judge others' actions harshly, but we excuse our own, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The personal histories exercise. It helps teams break through those judgments by humanizing each other.
Right. Instead of jumping to conclusions about someone's character, you start to see them as a product of their experiences. And that creates a much more understanding, empathetic environment.
Exactly. And then there's behavioral profiling. Lencioni's a big fan of using tools like Myers-Briggs. To understand each team member's strengths and weaknesses, I've seen this work wonders, especially with teams formed through acquisitions, where there's not a lot of loyalty initially.
The book had that great anecdote about the transportation company executive team, right after a merger. All from different companies. You can imagine the tension. And reading their Myers-Briggs profiles aloud, like breaking the ice.
It is amazing how something as simple as understanding someone's personality type can help a team connect on a deeper level.
Yeah, like, okay, now I get why you always need 10 minutes to process before you speak up in a meeting. It's not that you're disengaged, it's just how you're wired.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that shared vocabulary makes giving and receiving feedback less personal and more productive. Instead of saying, you're always so quiet, you can say, hey, I know you're an introvert, but we really need your input on this. Can you take some time to process and then share your thoughts?
So much better. Okay, so we've laid the foundation with trust. But I'm curious about these other dysfunctions. In my experience, I've seen teams with really strong personal relationships, but they still struggle with commitment. How does Lencioni explain that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of Lencioni's model. He argues that even with good personal relationships, the fear of conflict can really sabotage commitment.
You mean like teams avoid healthy debate because they're afraid of hurting each other's feelings?
Exactly. Lencioni's really clear that he's not talking about personal attacks or aggression, but rather passionate, productive debate, where ideas are challenged and the best solutions emerge.
Right, but that's hard, isn't it? I mean, it's so much easier to just go along with the group. Especially if you value those relationships.
Oh, it is hard, but the cost of avoiding conflict is huge. When teams shy away from those tough conversations, they end up with half-baked solutions and simmering resentment. And Lencioni argues that without trust, that healthy debate devolves into political maneuvering, with everyone just protecting their own turf.
So trust creates a safe space for disagreement. Like, you can challenge an idea without it turning into a personal attack. And that ultimately strengthens the commitment to the final decision.
That's the key. When everyone feels truly heard, even if their idea isn't chosen, they're much more likely to buy in and commit to the plan.
This reminds me of a team I worked with a few years ago. There was a lot of camaraderie, but they really struggled to make decisions. They'd spend hours in meetings going around in circles, afraid to disagree with the boss or each other. It was exhausting. And ultimately, nothing got done.
And that lack of commitment directly fuels the next dysfunction: avoidance of accountability.
Oh, right. Because if you haven't truly committed to a decision, you're much less likely to hold yourself or others accountable for its success.
Exactly. Lencioni really flips the script on accountability. He believes that peer pressure is far more powerful than a boss's scolding.
That makes sense. There's nothing quite like the look of disappointment from a respected colleague to motivate you to step up your game.
Right. But here's the catch. Lencioni emphasizes that the leader must set the tone for accountability. They need to be willing to hold people accountable, especially for behaviors that undermine the team, not just miss deadlines or results.
He tells those funny stories about CEOs who are uncomfortable giving behavioral feedback. One even said he wasn't the employee's parent.
It's almost as if they're abdicating responsibility, but creating a culture of accountability, where everyone feels empowered to address issues. It starts at the top.
And that leads us to the peak of the pyramid: inattention to results.
This is where teams lose sight of the big picture. They get bogged down in individual goals or petty politics.
Without trust, self-interest takes over, and the team's collective goals suffer. Lencioni really hammers home the importance of a clear scoreboard focused on shared goals to combat this.
The scoreboard analogy is so powerful. Everyone on a football team understands what winning looks like. You just look at the scoreboard. There's no room for interpretation or subjective opinions.
And yet so many teams rely on vague metrics like, is the CEO happy? Or do we feel like we're making progress? No wonder they're spinning their wheels.
Right. Lencioni argues that results-oriented teams, they establish clear, measurable goals from the outset, and they track their progress religiously.
And he highlights the dangers of individual ego getting in the way. He tells that story about Scottie Pippen, right? After Michael Jordan retired, Pippen became the star player, but the team started losing.
Oh yeah, classic example of someone prioritizing individual success over the team's performance. He also has those corporate examples like the chief scientist who only cared about royalties or the CTO who refused to do the grunt work. It all boils down to that "what about me?" mentality.
But on a truly high-performing team, everyone is invested in each other's success because they understand that individual achievements contribute to the collective goal. It's like that image of a rowing team, everyone pulling together in perfect synchronicity.
Exactly. When you achieve that level of alignment, it's an unstoppable force. It's interesting to consider how that team #1 dilemma Lencioni mentions plays into all of this.
Oh, you mean that tendency to be more loyal to the team you lead than the one you're a member of? That's a real head-scratcher. You'd think that being a strong member of the leadership team would benefit everyone below you?
You'd think so, but it can be a trap. It's easy to fall into that "my team needs this, my team deserves that" mindset. Suddenly, you're prioritizing your little fiefdom over the larger organization, and that bigger picture starts to fade.
It creates silos and infighting, exactly the opposite of what we're aiming for.
Right. Lencioni argues that in a true team, you have to move beyond self-interest and embrace a collective pursuit of what's best for the whole group.
Like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. When the entire organization succeeds, everyone benefits. But it takes a conscious effort to put the team's needs ahead of your own.
Yeah.
Especially when you're leading a group within that larger structure. Yeah, it's a tough balance for sure. Especially when you're trying to advocate for your team, but also keep that bigger picture in mind.
It is. It is. It all comes back to the vulnerability-based trust, doesn't it? You have to trust that your peers have the team's best interests at heart, even if their decisions don't always align with your immediate priorities.
Right. It's a real leap of faith sometimes.
It is. And that brings us to what I think is one of the most powerful takeaways from the book, the importance of clarity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So often teams think they're on the same page. But in reality, they're operating from totally different assumptions. It's like trying to build a house on shifting sand.
Exactly. And that's where Lencioni's emphasis on commitment clarification becomes so critical, making sure everyone explicitly states what they've agreed upon, leaving no room for ambiguity.
And then cascading that crystal clear information down through the organization so that every single person is aligned, rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, think of it as a shared mental model. Everyone's seeing the same picture, working towards the same goals. No more crossed wires or wasted effort.
This book has given me so much to think about. It's one thing to read about these concepts, but actually putting them into practice, that's a whole other challenge.
It is. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to get uncomfortable, but the payoff is huge.
When you see a team truly clicking, operating at that high level of performance, it's almost magical. The synergy, the shared purpose.
It's palpable. It's the ultimate competitive advantage. And it all starts with that willingness to embrace vulnerability and build that foundation of trust.
So if you're ready to take your team to the next level, we highly recommend checking out Overcoming the Five Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a practical, insightful guide that can fundamentally change how you work together.
And remember, you don't have to tackle everything at once. Pick one dysfunction that resonates with you. Try out some of the exercises Lencioni suggests and see what happens.
The journey to building a great team is an ongoing one, but it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. And as Lencioni reminds us, trust is the bedrock. Everything else flows from there.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into building extraordinary teams. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic to explore together. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving to build those incredible teams. See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.